this evening, taken from the archives of the Torah, the Old Testament, in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 6, and the second verse, which says that I have likened the daughter of Zion to a comely and delicate woman. Tonight we want to emphasize that point and call our study tonight the woman in waiting, the lady in waiting, depicted here as a woman who assists, a noble woman, a queen or a princess in her duties and including her public service, waking her, helping her to dress. But we read in the book of Matthew, chapter 25, that these maidens fell asleep waiting for the bridegroom. So we want to look at that and the rationale, the reasoning why this lady, this woman in waiting, has fallen asleep. But before we do that, I want to read from the book of Acts, chapter 26, commencing at the 24th verse. This is Shaul, the apostle Shaul, speaking and talking to a group of people, addressing Festus and others, explaining to them what happened to him while he was on his way to Damascus to harass the people. And he was struck down on the road and subsequently was chosen as a vessel to carry the work to the Gentiles. And he's explaining that, and the people, like today, are having difficulty believing what the apostle was indeed telling them and warning them. So verse 24 says, and as he, that's Paul, thus spake for himself, Festus said with a loud voice, Shaul, thou art beside thyself. Much learning thus make thee mad. But he said, I am not mad, most noble Festus, but speak forth the words of truth and soberness. It is interesting that Shaul's behavior was in keeping with the taste of propriety. He exhibits remarkable modesty and decorum. Madmen, they don't speak like he spoke. And so Shaul spoke the word of soberness. And he did not allow that provocation, that invidious imputation to affect his soberness. And that's was written for our admonition. So often when we speak to people about what needs to be done, particularly as we await the Messiah at his second coming, and how the woman, the assembly, the church, ought to prepare herself and keep the commandments. Often when we tell them, the people, about the commandments and the feast days, the festivals are to be kept. They might not all say it, but they conceive, even as Festus, and provoke us sometimes with thoughts. But we must, like Shaul, not allow those imputations, those kind of invidious assertions coming from their lips to affect our feelings. But we must just do what is right. And so this evening, I want to call your attention. Again, we go back into the archives of the Old Testament, and we look at Shemot, that's Exodus chapter 19, verses 5 and 6, and Yahweh, fresh from taking the children out from bondage, that's Egypt, and he wanted to teach them the mechanics of salvation and tell them how to live. So he said to them, if you obey me, you will be unto me a kingdom of priests. And they responded by saying, everything that Yah says we will do. And as we know, by way of hindsight, and so we use that insight into the hindsight, so we get the foresight, understanding of what we need to prepare ourselves and to prepare this woman for the coming of the Messiah. They violated the commandments, and as a consequence, they were given a new set of laws that became their schoolmasters. So as we look into the archives, we see primarily three sets of laws, and we ought to make the distinctions between them so we understand, because often we hear people say the law is done away with. And as we're moving into the autumn festivals, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and Sukkot, it's important, crucial, that we have a understanding of these things, and particularly the moral law. So we have the moral law, and we have the ceremonial law, and we have the civil law. We want to look at the moral law and to make some expository thoughts as we look at it. When we talk of the moral law, we're talking about the Ten Commandments. It's a transcript of Yah's character. It is universal in that it is for everybody. And it tells us of Yah's unchangeable nature. It does that. And so it is a reduction to words of Yah's thoughts in printed pages. That's the Ten Commandments. Nobody is exempt from that. And sometimes we see that some of these laws overlaps in the sense that, take for example, the Sabbath. It is a moral code. It's a moral law, meaning that if you break it, you sin. Because we are told in 1 John 3:4 that sin is the transgression of the law. Sin is the transgression of the law. So when you break the Sabbath, when you don't keep the Sabbath, you are sinning. And people do that almost religiously each week. So they don't even understand that they are being immoral. They see morality in a different view. They see that. And so the Ten Commandments is not only moral, but it's ceremonial in that it relates to religious practices, because we're asked to practice to keep the Shabbat. And usually those ceremonial and civil laws, they relate to the children of Israel. And the paradox here is this: when I say they relate to the children of Israel, I am simply not talking about a geographical Israel. I've long since said once you accept the Messiah and you follow him, you keep your eye on him. The Bible says we must follow the Lamb wherever he goeth. And that means wherever he shows us in terms of how we walk by faith. That's our walk. We must follow him. And so when he says, if you love me, keep my commandment, you demonstrate your love for him by keeping his commandment. You do them. It becomes, faith then becomes a verb. Faith then becomes a verb. So the believer who says, I love him, but doesn't keep his commandment is lying. That's what the word actually says. And I'm going to ask you to turn with me to Yohanan Aleph. And I'll read it again, what I just said. Chapter 3 and verse 4. Whoever committed sin transgresseth the law. You transgress the law, and it's counted as sin. So the law, the moral law, points out sin. That's what it does. And verse 9 says, whoever is born of Yah does not commit sin. It doesn't become habitual. You fall into it, but you get out quickly by way of repentance. And so this is important for us to understand. Whoever is born of Yah does not commit sin, for his seed remaineth in him, and he cannot sin because he is born of Yah. It is Yah's righteousness, his seed, in you. Therefore, the person who habitually, despite his or her claim to be a believer, violates the Sabbath, not only breaks the ceremonial undertakings, but also the moral law. That's interesting. So I'm going to ask you to come with me to the book of Leviticus, and we will dilate upon chapter 23, because the lady in waiting is asleep. And it is likely that when the bridegroom appears, she will still be snoring. Chapter 23. And Yah spake unto Moshe, saying, speak unto the children of Yisrael. Speak unto them. And say unto them concerning the festivals of Yah, which ye shall proclaim to the whole convocations, even these are my festivals. Let's hold it there. Moshe, you're the mediator between the people, the children of Israel, and myself, says Yah. Tell them, let it be known to them, declare it publicly, that these festivals, they're mine. They're mine. Speak to all the congregations. Let them know that these festivals are mine. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is the Shabbat at rest. That's a moral law. It's a command. So every 7-day cycle, Yah says we ought to meet in a holy convocation to celebrate this festival. So the 7th day is a festival. It's a feast day. And Yah bundles this with the rest of them. And Yah, in relation to marriage, had made it known that that which I put together, I join together, let no man put asunder. When I put the 7th-day Sabbath with the rest of the feast days, let no church, no deacon, no elder, no priest, no bishop disassemble it from the rest. Don't let them divorce my Sabbath from the rest of the festivals. Because there is a link morally and ceremonially, because I want you to practice it. It must become habitual to every generation. But the people, they speak like this. We're not under the law. Having made no distinction between the moral law, the ceremonial law, or the civil law. They've made no distinction, so they say the law is done away with. That's how they speak. And then they say that we are exempt from the law because we are under grace. That's how they speak. And they do that invariably. Those who do not keep the laws. And even those who keep the Shabbat, they are complicit in the act of dissembling the Sabbath from the rest of the commandments. They do that, or from the rest of the festivals. It is interesting that most people who declare to be believers, they're waiting for the second coming of Yah. But they do not keep the Feast of Trumpets. They also believe in a judgment. If you ask them, do you believe in a judgment? They would say, yes, sure, there is a judgment. But they do not keep Yom Kippur, the Day of Judgment, the Day of Atonement. They believe when he comes, they're going to rejoice and enjoy with him and go to the banquet, but they do not keep the Feast of Tabernacle. They do not keep Sukkot. And so you see that contradiction so glaring. It's quite clear that this woman, the maiden, is sleeping. The lady in waiting has fallen asleep. And so, like Shaul, we have to say to the Festuses, we're not mad. It's in the word that these things must be kept. And so when the children of Israel, who were promised that they would be made a kingdom of priests, they violated commandments. They were then given a set of laws and were told, this is your schoolmaster. This is your schoolmaster. So come with me to Galatians chapter 3, the book of Galatians chapter 3, and verse 24 says, "Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Yeshua, that we might be justified by faith." Justified by faith. Let me put it another way. The law was our guardian until Yeshua came. It protected us until we could be made right with Yah through faith. So when I hear a person says, we're under grace, we're not under the law, come with me to Titus. The book of Titus, and we will read chapter 2, starting at verse 11. Let's hear what this says, because people use this verse indiscriminately without understanding what it is saying. Verse 11, "For the grace of Yah," this is what they boast, "that bringeth salvation," that what is salvation? Yeshua, "hath appeared to all men." How many men? Now, if grace is appearing to all men, how can some claim it and assume that it doesn't belong to other people? Let's read it again. "For the grace of Yah that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men." Teaching, what does grace does? Grace teaches us that denying unrighteousness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and perfect in the present world. So if it teaches us to be righteous, how do we know what righteousness is without the law? The law is what points sin out. But they say they're under this grace. But the grace teaches that we must live Kodesh lives. And so it's clear that they're not understanding what they're reading. And so we must point out also that there is a distinction between the book of the law and the book of the covenant. Clear distinction. In the sense that Moses placed the book of the law at the side of the ark. And we could read that for you. Deuteronomy, come with me there, Deuteronomy chapter 31, and we will read from verse 24 to 26. "And it came to pass when Moses had made an end of writing the words," who write the words? Moses, "of this law in a book, until they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites which bear the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, saying, Take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of Yah your Elohim, that it may be a witness against you." It was put in the side, whereas the tables written with Yah's finger was put inside. So we see a clear distinction that Yah wrote one with his finger and Moses wrote one with his finger. So when the apostle is letting us know that the law is done away with, he is telling you that issues like circumcision and the killing of animals that were rituals during the festival era, they're done away with. It's nothing to do with the Ten Commandments. That's universal, and it's the transcript of Yah's character. Yah doesn't change. We need to understand that. But as I indicated, we're coming up to the autumn, the fall feast. And we have preached, we have spoken kindly, sternly, firmly, and we still have people like Festus thinking that what we're saying is not right. But we ought to point out to them, even as Isaiah 8 and verse 20 points out, if you speak not according to the word, there is no truth, no light in you. So, in fact, what we're doing is commended. And I show you why it is commended and who commends it. Come with me to Matthew 5. Matthew 5 and verse 17. The word here says that none should conceive the thought. Think not that I am come, this is Yeshua speaking, to destroy the law or the prophets. I'm not come to destroy, but to fulfill. So that which your bishop, your priest, your elder, your institution have believed that these things are done away with, it's here in the word. So I'm kind of intrigued as to know where's your source from. Verse 17, I should say, I read it again. Think not that I am come to destroy the laws or the prophets. I'm not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till Shemayim and Eretz pass, heaven and earth, one jot or one tittle shall in no way pass from the law till all has been fulfilled. Whoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men, so he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, which is what we're doing, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, we shall in no way enter into the kingdom of heaven. I mean, that's very clear. So the person who looks at this and say the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath, is done away with, what they do is they wrench it, unbundle it from the other feast days, and they say, we keep this, we're Sabbath keepers. We are law-abiding citizens. And Yah said, let no man put asunder. You can't do that. These are my feasts, my festivals. And so they take the Ten Commandments, which is a transcript of Yah's character, and they give it a holy ceremonial status. And Yah says, you can't do that. You can't do that. Not only is it moral, but it's also ceremonial in that it has religious elements to it. And that they're not considering. So let's look at Matthew 25. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. 10, as you know, is global. And 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. They that were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels. with their lamps, while the bridegroom tarried. They all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said unto the wise, Give us your oil, for our lamps have gone out. Our menorah has gone out. Remember, the menorah in the temple was never supposed to go out. It was supposed to be fed olive oil and keep burning forever. But just like it went out in Eli's days in chapter 3 of 1 Samuel, one would get the impression that the oil here has gone out in the contemporary church. In the Laodicean church, it's gone out. And so usually when people are sleeping, they turn their lights off. And so Matthew 5 is telling us of the words of Yeshua. He's letting you know the reason why Laodicea is sleeping. And let me show you even more blatantly that Laodicea, the lady in waiting, is sleeping. Come with me to Revelation 18. Revelation 18, and I will take two verses here, 22 and 23. And the voice of the harpers and the musicians and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more. It's like going past a church that usually was vibrant and real. And we're being told here, everything has ceased. It will not be heard at all in thee, and the craftsman of whatever craft he be shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. Verse 23, and the light of the candle. Did you hear me? The menorah has gone out. Remember, in Revelation chapter 3, Yohanan is given a vision, and he sees 7 candlesticks, that heptadic structure of 7. And Laodicea is the last candlestick. And we're told here in chapter 18, verse 23, and the light of the candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For the merchants were the great men of the earth, of the Eretz, for they by their sorceries were all the nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of the saints and of all that were slain unto the earth. The lamp has gone out. And one doesn't need a degree in discernment at all to recognize that at a particular time in our experience, when all the church's light went out, was during the time of the pandemic, when all the churches were closed. And at that time, the people were getting their instructions from medical personnel and from scientists, from those kind of merchants. And so the word wants you to know that that which sorcery here, the Greek word for that, is pharmakia. And that was the time that It happened. So tonight we are asking the question, is the woman really ready? And the reason I ask that question is very germane to the times in which we live. Because we're told that when he comes with a trumpet sound. First Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16 and 17 tells us that when he comes with a shout, and the dead in Yeshua will rise. And those who are alive will be what? Caught up to meet him in the air. Now, what intrigues me about this is this, that many of the people today are waiting for the second coming of Yeshua. In a few weeks, it will be the Feast of Trumpets. The first day of the new moon is a Sabbath. It doesn't matter what day it falls on. It will be a Sabbath, and it will be an annual Sabbath that is to be kept, that Yah says, you should not take this away from the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath. They are bundled together. But the churches have taken it away and said, some of them, that is, some of them don't even bother with the 7-day Sabbath. And so they become complicit in the sin of breaking the Sabbath. And we need to understand that Yah is serious. Because in Hebrews chapter 1, he says, I have spoken to you in sundry times through the prophets, but now I speak to you through my son, Yeshua. Listen to him. But of course, the woman is asleep. And I just want to finish this by saying we have a moral duty. We have a duty to keep Yah's commandments, because we're no longer under the Levitical order, the Aaronic order of things, because the word says that in Luke chapter 16 and 16, the law and the prophet, they were preached up until Yohanan. But now the kingdom is preached. So when Yeshua came, he restored the Melchizedek order, which was given to Abraham. And therefore everybody is a priest, which is what he offered them at Mount Sinai in Shemot, that's Exodus chapter 19, 5 and 6. If you obey me, so everything is premised, is contingent upon obedience. You cannot not obey Yah and expect to have a place reserved in the kingdom. It's foolish. It is asinine. It is to think that you can just go along and do what you want to do and then have a place reserved in the kingdom. No, you can't do that. And so tonight we just wanted to encourage you that the festivals are coming up in a few weeks' time, and perhaps you've never, ever kept any of them, and particularly the Day of Judgment. Because I've heard it said and that the atonement was completed at the cross. I've heard people say, "Oh well, I was atoned." And my question is, by whom? Because in Hebrews 8:4, the word makes it clear that Yeshua, while he was on earth, he was not a priest. An atonement is the work of a priest. He's the appointed high priest, but he never acted in that capacity while he was on earth. So your atonement could only have been taken place while and after he ascended. Your atonement is taking place after he ascended from the holy place to the most holy place. So I'm inviting you, I'm encouraging you, like Shaul, soberly, that despite of the provocations that people have thrown out, we want to ask you to go into the Word and think about obeying Yah. Because if you don't, you do so at your own peril. In a few weeks, as I said, trumpets, Day of Atonement, which is when the people are judged, and he decides who is saved and who is not saved. And of course, after that, if you know you're saved, then we rejoice. That is a festival of Sukkot. So may we look into this again and think about it prayerfully before we rashly decide that these things are not for us. In Yeshua's name, I encourage you. Amen.